I think we're going to get a matched play handbook. I was a little late on my timing, but as I predicted, we are indeed getting a general's handbook for Warhammer the Old World. I thought it'd be a good idea to have a quick look through the Warhammer community article that's just come out yesterday. Obviously, there's a good chunk of stuff in there. It doesn't actually tell us anything other than the things that may have been rumoured, but it also gives us a contents page that we can break down. I also want to talk about some of the things that I've heard rumoured for the upcoming FAQ. I'm not going on any insider information here. This is all just stuff that I've heard discussed publicly. So I wanted to sort of summarize the things that I think might be coming in the FAQ, see what we might be getting up to in the upcoming months. Now, while this isn't technically super important, this email did come out at 8 minutes past 4 yesterday, so all of the group chats that I were in were blowing up because there was an email with some Age of Sigmar news, some Horus Heresy, sure, whatever, but then also Warhammer the Old World Match Play Guide revealed, and this came out 21 minutes before they actually posted the article. It was the last article they posted the day, the 4:30 article slot, which meant that for 21 minutes we got some wild speculation, which was really funny to read. But that did take us to the actual match play guide when they posted it at 4:30. And it says, the Old World Match Play Guide, New Ways to Play in the World of Legends, which is interesting because it does sort of imply that we're not actually going to be playing the same way with the kill points. Whether or not that comes through in the way that it sort of sounds like it might do, we will see. But it is nice to get Old World news, and it's nice to get actual Old World support as well. We do get a nice fluff intro here. Can you believe it's been 18 months since we returned to the Old World? It doesn't feel that long, honestly, but I think probably because I've then transitioned to doing loads of content around it. It's really flown by. It's been an absolute blast playing Fantasy again. 9 factions have returned to the fray with arcane journals, new miniatures, and many returning classics, and with the arrival of Cathay, there is a new and very old power standing firm against the vicissitudes of chaos. I think this is worth just pointing out and really being impressed by. If you look at the release rate for Warhammer Fantasy in previous editions, 18 months for 9 books, that's one every 2 months on average. That's pretty nuts. That's way more support than Warhammer Fantasy has ever got. Obviously, they had to do more support because they were bringing it back from the dead, but I'm really pleased with the rate that we've been getting things, even though there have been some weird gaps in the middle there. Obviously, new release coming in Cathay in a couple of weeks' time. I believe the actual on-the-shelf release date is slated to be July 5th. So we are going to be getting this really soon, and I'm expecting the Arcane Journal to come out after Cathay, but I could be surprised, and maybe we get it between now and then, because that's theoretically a whole month of potential releases. I guess we'd have to see it come up for pre-order this weekend if that was going to be the case, though, or maybe next weekend. More and more generals are fighting campaigns against the land of men, and the tournament scene is thriving. This is absolutely true. We'll have a look at Old World rankings in a second, just because it shows how many tournaments there have been, how many players. There is way more support for this game than I thought there was going to be, which is fantastic. Obviously, I've got a vested interest. I want to keep doing this, keep making videos, keep going to events, but it's just fantastic to see that people have really picked up Old World, and I think that's in part with how well I think they've captured the feel of the Old World again. Obviously, there are issues, but it looks like they're going to be addressing those issues to some extent. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I feel really positive about the fact that we've had a good amount of support so far, and they've shown that they are willing to put some extra work in as well. Something I really like about this book is it's very reminiscent in my mind of the 6th, 7th, and 8th edition rule books, the actual fancy rule books. So if you look at 6th edition here, we've got, very similar. We've got Galmaraz on the front there. Again, coming into 7th edition, we've got a very similar book, and then 8th edition, we've got that classic fantasy Warhammer that is so, representative of Warhammer Fantasy, and it's really nice to see that coming back, but with a little bit more, I guess, flair. This is almost representative more of the 7th edition book, but either way, really like the art that they've got in there. I maybe would have preferred to have seen that on the front of the Old World rulebook, but cool. Glad to see it come back. Also glad to see the thickness of this. It doesn't need to be incredibly thick. One of the problems people do complain about is having to lug so many books around with them for tournaments, and that's not so much an issue for Old World yet. It's more of a thing that people tend to complain about for like 40k, when you got to the point where you might be bringing 5 books with you to a pickup game at your local shop. So if you're going to take the physical copy of this, even though PDFs of it will be available, having it nice and light is something I'm okay with. And I'm assuming it also gets represented by like that in the price. So if we have a look at the match play guides for the other games, I'm sure it's going to be in a very similar sort of price point. Actually, having a quick look at the other games that Games Workshop does, it's £20. You can see here for the Middle Earth match play guide, which is probably more in line with what I'm expecting. But then the General's Handbook, they're charging £36 for. You do get some, I'm guessing, probably plastic objective markers with that as well. But yeah, maybe at that sort of price point, one that I'm more interested in picking up online as opposed to buying a physical copy of. The price of supplementary rules aside, what are we actually going to be getting in this book? Well, they've been nice enough to give us a teaser image of the contents. They say that the guide will be useful for people organising events, which is interesting. I've spoken to a couple of people about this, and there's some interesting perspectives around this bit here. So there are people who have been running a lot of events, and whether or not they've gotten a bee in their bonnet about people just running it in a different way to how it is, or whether they want it to be a useful guide, or it's maybe to do with the fact that they have offered support to certain tournaments and that support has been turned down because it came with the condition of legacy factions being banned from those big events. I'm not sure which of the above it is. If they hadn't gone out of their way to offer support to specifically LVO, the Las Vegas Open, where they had said, we'll give you, I think it was prize support or something along those lines, but in return you're not allowed to use the legacy factions, I would be more open to believing that it was altruistic. But however, I'm not upset to see more suggestions for how the game can be played, whether or not they do get picked up by tournament organisers who have been doing this for the last 18 months in Old World specifically. So there's going to be cardinal rules for all participants, a guide to running an organising event, advice on scoring, pairing and army composition, and suggested rules for placing terrain. So just to dial back what I was saying before, I think it is good that there is at least how to run an event for people who haven't been doing so or are coming from other games. I think it's great to have more support to get more people engaged in the hobby. I don't want to gatekeep the hobby in any way. And also suggested rules for placing terrain I think is good as well, because I don't believe there's really much or any of that in the actual main army book. So this is welcome. Again, this is something that tournament organisers should feel very comfortable either picking up or using their own tournament formats, whatever they want to go with. But I'm happy to see this because, again, it lowers the barrier for entry for people getting into the hobby who don't necessarily have any idea how they could be deploying stuff. So having official support there is nice. There are 3 suggested compositions: Open War, Grand Melee, and Combined Arms, each of which have slightly different restrictions on characters and units. This, I think, is interesting. So we're seeing actual restrictions on how the army building is done through the different format of what is played. Now, if I'm being realistic, I think this is going to be a case of Open War is likely the sort of generic, this is what you can have from your book, this is the tournament, the normal stuff. Grand Melee will be some version of, and then Combined Arms will be some version of, and the last 2 are going to be more narrative focused, where it's not necessarily meant for tournament play, in the way that they might have smaller or bigger games. So I believe there's different restrictions in 40k, for example, if you're playing at 1,000 points or 2,000 points. Maybe it's something to do with that, or maybe it's just going, here's how to play your sort of like most balanced version that we're going to release rules for, and here's how to play, you know, if you want to do some sort of multiplayer mode, and then you know, who knows, something in there to break it down. But I am interested to see what they think there's going to be as 3 different suggested compositions. So curious how that's going to work out. 6 match play scenarios are designed to challenge players in different ways, while optional secondary objectives and secret objectives can mix things up even further. This word here is great. Optional is good, because if the secondary objectives are good, then they'll get used, and if they're not, then people feel very comfortable with ignoring them because they're specifically pointed out as optional. Secret objectives are something that concern me, coming from 40k. So in 40k, there have been various different versions of secret objectives or like backup scoring, and I find that they punish the person who's ahead in a way that I don't necessarily like from a competitive standpoint, but also it just opens the door for more shenanigans. When you play against someone, you want to believe that they're being honest, and that's usually the case, but if you put things like this in, there are more opportunities for someone to mess around and try and do some level of shenanigans in favour of winning as opposed to in favour of playing fairly. And this is something that we have seen actively in the 40k tournament scene, including people being asked not to come back to the big tournament circuit here in the UK. So that's not just me fear-mongering, that's something that we've actively seen happen. And it's not necessarily caught all of the time, but it does concern me a little bit. As for secondary objectives, I don't know what these are going to be. So I'm hoping secondary objectives are similar to the sort of stuff that we've got at the moment, like command and control, where if you're holding this objective at the end of the game, you get 200 points. I'm hoping it's that level of secondary objectives. I would be open to some scoring throughout the game as well. I think that could be interesting. So maybe there are 2 objectives in the middle of the board, and if you stand on them at the end of the turn, you get 50 victory points if your unit has a banner or something like that. You know, some level of the sort of thing we've seen brought in by various tournament organisers who have been playing around with trying to not necessarily favour dragons and maybe bring back big bricks of infantry to various levels of success. So I think there is scope here for this to be interesting. I'm just curious as to how they've done it. But I'd like to see more stuff. There's still the base book scenarios, and I think like tournament missions or like scenarios, open battle, whatever you end up going with, I think this is the perfect sort of thing for tournament organisers to play differently to Games Workshop's recommendations if they don't feel that it lines up with their expectations. That's something that's really tied in with what people accept as within the scope of a tournament organizer to change. So I'm not concerned about this. I'm hopeful that it'll be good, and if it's not good, I think people will just go on playing the same way that they have been. So this will be interesting to see. Down here at the bottom as well, there's a separate section on doubles events, including rules for composition, alliances, scenarios, and potential contradictions. I think this is interesting. As it stands, for most games that Games Workshop does, I don't know about all of them, but there's not really any actual guidelines for doubles. I think it's interesting that they're writing that. I hope that these are more open than the ones that are for the recent Warhammer World doubles event, or maybe it hasn't come up yet. So there was a doubles event at Warhammer World where people, the armies that you're allowed to bring are only the ones that are allowed to be allied within the books. So for example, if you're playing Grand Army Tomb Kings, it would say you can ally with ABC here. What that means is legacy factions are obviously not allowed to be played because it's a Games Workshop event at Warhammer World, but also all of the armies of infamy don't have any allies that they can potentially ally with. When contacted, the events team said, oh, actually, these weren't written to be balanced around allies, so if you wanted to go to the doubles event, you weren't allowed to use any of the Arcane Journal armies, which I think is a very poor understanding on how the rules writing works. None of the books were written to be balanced around doubles, so I'm hoping that that was a specifically events team ruling, and we're not going to see doubles events which have super restrictive combinations. I think part of the joy of doubles is taking less competitive stuff, not just going, oh, let's play Warriors of Chaos and Beastmen, they fit together thematically, and also you've got a really good wizard, I've got a really good dragon, we can cover each other's weaknesses to some extent. I think it's more fun when you go, I've been to no events, my friend's been to 2, we're going to have fun, I want to dip my toe into the event scene, I own Orcs and Goblins, he owns Empire. That's the more realistic sort of what you tend to see at doubles outside of, 2 or 3 teams that go there who've made a very efficient pairing. So I don't want this to stop people from going to events. I don't want this to be picked up if it's going to be a case of, Orcs and Goblins can only ally with 3 things. Do you and your friend both own one army, and do you, one's evil, one's good? Too bad, so sad, you're not able to play doubles events together. So that's my main concern here. But if it's more open than that, I think this is really fun. I'd like to see more rules brought in that aren't just for the competitive scene. One of the issues that we see with match play is, especially for games like 40k, and I'm going back to 40k because it's the game that I can draw my experience from, it's the one that I played a lot of. The game gets shaped by competitive players because it's balanced to competitive players, which is fine for a tournament pack, but then that filters down into the casual play, and even though if you're playing casually, you can do whatever you want. To an extent, if you're super casual, the match play guide might not be for you. You might just have more fun playing with your friends outside of that. But people tend to want to pick it up, so I'd like to see more things that I want to see the rules and the balance in there for the competitive scene, but I also want to see, here's some examples of how to have more fun that are less balanced with your friends. Here's some examples on how to tweak things for you and your friends outside of what we've got in the book. So if it's in that sort of direction, that'd be really cool. And team events are great, and I'd love to see more of those in Old World, but escalation events as well, in which players' armies grow as the tournament progresses. I think that's really fun. We don't really see that. It's something I'd be super keen to actively participate in, or even an escalation league. When I was starting playing Warhammer 40,000, I got back into the hobby. I did it through an escalation league where you built and painted and played some games, 500 points a month, and you did it over 4 or 5 months. So I'd love to see something like this coming back, and maybe that's something that I need to run through the channel, going forwards, maybe coming into the end of the year, beginning of next year, we'll look at doing some sort of escalation event. But yeah, so I think a little bit, I'm holding opinion on this, but I think it has potential to be really positive. So I'm hopeful that we get some good stuff there for the less competitive events where you've got doubles and escalation, and then also teams is just great in general. So going on to the content, Hail to the Victor, Valor Before Dishonor, and then some bits about organising events. Now, I don't know if this is this section, but I have heard rumours flying around that we're not going to be using the 0-20 system that pretty much every Old World event I've been seeing, runs, where, you use a points differential. If you score 400 points more than your opponent, then potentially you've got something like a 12-8 victory. Everyone runs a slightly different version of this. It might be 100 points. If you've got a 100-point differential, then it's a draw, or it might be 150 points, or WTC have 250 points. And then the gap between each differential, if you have 150 points, that might be the gap between 11-9 and a 12-8. There's lots of different ways of running it, and I wouldn't be sad to see that standardized to an extent. But I also have heard that this is not going to be a 0-20 system. This is going to be more, I don't want to say dumbed down, but this is going to be simplified in terms of it's not going to be quite as granular as the 0-20. It's going to be broken down into, I don't want to say just like major, minor victory, but I think it might be something along those lines. So we'll have to see how that comes out and whether tournament organisers pick it up. But yeah, that's potentially what these two front sections are. On to organising the event. Oh, there we go. Oh man, it would help if I read ahead, wouldn't it? Tournament scoring and victory points and rankings. Yeah, so okay, so the tournament scoring, I think that's probably what we're going to see here, where instead of it being just a straight 0-20, they've got some sort of system that they're bringing in. As a Warhammer player, I am allergic to change. However, I will go in with an open mind. If it's good, I will be happy to use it. If it's not good, I'm sure tournaments will just continue to use the things before. Army composition. So this is where we might see some seasonal rule changes. Now, this is something that I believe they do in Age of Sigmar, and I don't play Age of Sigmar, and I haven't played Age of Sigmar, so apologies if I get this wrong. But as I understand it, they bring out, in their case, maybe it's every year. Let's call it a yearly book where the way the game is played is changed to some extent, where there are different restrictions and bonuses put in. I wonder if that's something that they're potentially going to look at doing in terms of a tournament pack, where they go army composition. For this year, we're going to limit, you can only have 0-1 of this sort of thing, or maybe they're bringing in some of the classic restrictions that we saw from older versions of the of Warhammer Fantasy, where at 2,000 points you actually only get 0-1 Lord level hero. So in that case, it would be you could bring your Chaos Lord, but you're not also bringing a level 4 wizard. You'd be at best bringing a level 2 wizard. That could be something that they're bringing in here instead of the more open army composition rules that we've got at the moment. Or they could be changing the number of points you can spend in certain spots. So maybe instead of going 50% on heroes, it's going down to 25%. Or, 25% lords, 25% heroes. Again, going back to that sort of army composition of yesteryear that a lot of us are quite familiar with. Interestingly, that's 3 pages. So we could be seeing a full breakdown, which is here's how to play every army. I hope it's not that, because they definitely won't include legacy factions in there. So, yeah, interested to see what they do with army composition. But I think the game has been very enjoyable for the last 18 months. I think the meta has started to get a little bit stale. I don't want to see changes anywhere near as frequent as 40k or Age of Sigmar, but I feel like we're now at a point where we would benefit from a couple of changes. So be interesting to see what they do for army composition. Field of battle 16, so 1 page field of battle. I'm assuming this is just talking about how terrain is set up. I don't feel like they're putting terrain formats on there, so I'm not quite sure what we're getting. However, into the match play scenarios, so there is 2 pages just talking about match play, so that will likely, from experience with other games, this will likely be a full breakdown on the order of everything from step 1, determine the scenario you're playing, step 2, determine the terrain deployment you're on, step 3, declare any there's not really any pre-game stuff to declare, or declare any units that are in ambushes. Step 4, deploy normal troops. Step 5, deploy scouts. Whatever it'll break down to be. You can go and have a look at what comes in the 40k one for a more in detail breakdown of how they tend to split stuff up. But I think that's probably what we get there. A page for victory. I'm assuming this is just talking about how to calculate victory points. Is it stuff that's dead? Is it stuff that secondary objectives? All of that sort of stuff there. And then we've got 6 scenarios. This is interesting because it's only a single page per scenario. So I wonder if these have got fixed terrain layouts, because I don't think you could realistically do multiple terrain layouts for these. It'll probably have some level of primary scoring, and by primary I mean there might be one big objective that we can potentially draw on. So upon the Fields of Glory, I'm assuming that's going to be open battle. They typically start with that sort of thing, although I guess it could be drawn battle lines. King of the Hill, that's likely going to be hold something in the center of the map. Drawn battle lines, maybe we see something where you get points for being in your opponent's deployment zone at the end of the game. Close quarters, this is likely going to be, instead of being 24 inches apart, you're going to end up 12 or 18 inches apart, so you're a little bit closer. Or it could be you deploy in table quarters, something that I think has really been missed from the general old world deployment is everything's kind of just, it's one end of the table to the other, and that's fine, but diagonal actually feels really good to play. Shout out to Lewis, who at his Saffron Slam events has taken diagonal deployments and messed around with the mission might be the same, but the deployment and the map is a little bit different. I've really enjoyed the different angle of, instead of just going, well, I know that if I go straight forwards I'm going to reach you and I've got some space to either side, going diagonally where you've got more depth to part of your deployment zone, you've got a thinner part of the deployment zone. It gives you a little bit of a different, it just changes things up, it keeps things fresh. So I'd be interested in seeing that sort of diagonal or quarter deployment zone coming in. A chance encounter, I'm assuming this is going to be some sort of, hopefully not, but this to me seems like meeting engagement, where it's a chance encounter, both armies are caught by surprise, roll off, see if some of your stuff doesn't start on the table, or maybe there are rules like turn 1, you're not ready, you can't charge, you can't shoot. I could see something like that. And then encirclement, this is interesting because to me this sounds like one person's going to be deployed centrally, either in the center of the board or the center of their backline, and then the other player is going to be around them. So whether that's going to be, maybe the central player has the central strip of the board, and then the other player has the outside edges on a long way deployment, or it could be circular, or it could, there's a lot of different things that we could see. This is the sort of thing that you see in, like, if it was to be broken down, typically more like the narrative scenarios, and I don't know that this one is going to be as easily balanced competitively, because if it's not symmetrical, issues come in where you can lose the game before turn 1, just on a dice roll. Like if your army is unable to deal with being pushed on all sides and then you lose the roll off and end up in the middle of the board, that could be a real issue for you. So maybe not one that gets picked up by tournaments, or maybe I'm talking at my backside and it's not what it sounds like at all. Who can say? All of those 1 page, that's fine. On to secondary objectives, and this is a big section because, oh wait, hold on, from encirclement it goes from 25 to 28. You know what? I bet there's a double page art spread between there. Secondary objectives, 28 to 36. That is 8 pages, or probably more realistically 6 pages and then a double page art spread. I think this is going to be very interesting, and I was speaking to another creator yesterday who expressed interest in seeing things like instead of having objectives that you stand on, as you might see in Age of Sigmar or 40k, they wanted to keep the game more similar to the way fantasy has always been played. Kill points, there's more flexibility in the way that you play the game outside of, I just have to stand on objectives. And they were pointing out stuff like maybe you get points for killing a wizard, or maybe you get points for killing a monster. These sorts of things could come in, and maybe the secondary objectives are something that you can pick around at. So there's, I don't want to say a deck, because they haven't shown that it's going to be coming with some cards, and I think that's the sort of thing they'd be talking about if it was some sort of physical media that they'd actually be selling with it. But maybe there's just going to be a list of objectives that you can pick, and you could be like, okay, I can have one secondary objective, or I can have two secondary objectives, and I've got one where, if you kill a unit on turn 3 specifically, or if you kill a unit that started in the flank, or if you kill a wizard on the first 4 turns of the game, or something like that, maybe there's something in there that pushes you to play in a certain way, and it gives you a nominal amount of points there that can change the scoring. I'm not sure, but I think secondary objectives are the main reason that we're probably going to see things go away from a 0-20 scoring system, because when you add secondary objectives in, say you've got an additional 300 points you can score, that kind of skews the table. So, you can only get to a 0-20, you can't get to a 0-23, because your opponent's managed to score 300 points more for getting the objective and tabling you. So, yeah, interesting stuff here. I am keen to see what they do with it. Then double scenarios, only 3 missions here, which is interesting, but also I think is fine, because a lot of the doubles I've seen are doubles RTT events. I have been to a doubles event for Old World, which was a 2-day event, but I think doubles are typically seen as a little bit less competitive, goes well, pairs well as an RTT, a 1-day event setup, so that's not something that I'm super upset to see them spend less time on. An Alliance of Warlords, this is going to come in, just more rules for doubles there, and then additional rules. There, it looks like there's 2 pages here for secret objectives. I don't know why there's an entire thing that says additional rules and then secret objectives. Are we getting more additional rules outside of the secret objectives? Perhaps. Not really sure what that is meant to be, but as I said, I expressed trepidation for secret objectives. I'm not necessarily keen on the concept, but again, they've even said the secondary objectives are optional, so if those are optional, these are even more optional, and I'm sure people will play around with them. There'll be an interesting sort of 3 to 6 months while people work out whether the objectives and the secret objectives are worth putting in, or whether they unbalance the game in a way that makes it unfun, and and then it'll sort of settle in, and most people will play one way or the other, I'm sure. Finally, we get this last section, which gets the bit that I'm most interested in. So it's a one-stop shop for all your competitive match play needs, yada yada. Pre-orders fairly soon. SoonTM, we'll see when that is. Will be available as a softcover book and EPUB, and it'll land alongside a new FAQ and errata document, which brings a few targeted changes to the rules of the game. We'll have more on that from the rules dragon soon. So I think this is interesting. In my predictions video, I said that I wasn't expecting to see any points changes, and I think this kind of lines up with that. I'd be happy to see some points changes, but this feels like it's going to be smaller scale than. So the errata, I think there are some interactions that need to be cleared up, which is fine. That's, rules need to be clarified. This is a Games Workshop game, we expect that. And then FAQ as well. So this is what I'm hoping changes some bits and pieces. I'm hoping that this is an FAQ alongside the sort of twice-a-year ones that you get in, for example, 40k, where they go, we're going to make some sweeping changes to the game. The factions that are doing too well, we will address. The factions that are doing too poorly, we will address, and then come in with some tweaks from there. So really interested to see what they do. To talk about some of the rumours that I have heard people discussing openly, I have heard rumours that, of course, let's start off with the big one, Pillar of Fire, going to be changed in some way. I think the way that would most likely be changed is it just goes to random movement. That you could do more clever changes where it still picks the direction it goes, because that's the thing that makes it interesting, but it does less damage, or it only ever deals damage for the amount of dice that it rolls, so you can't chain it through 6 units. If you roll a 3 inches, any units it hits with that 3 inches take damage, but everything after that doesn't take damage. I think that seems unlikely, if I'm being realistic. Normally, the way that Games Workshop change things is they go for the the easiest to consume for the variety of, like, the masses of players who play. There are going to be, the 5% of people who play competitively who like, actually, I want Pillar of Fire to still work in the way that it does, but I want it to be more reasonably balanced. I'd be happy to, read a whole paragraph that explains how it works. But that's probably not what's going to happen. It's more likely that it just gets changed to the same as all of the other vortices that do damage, which is just moves in a random direction, and then that probably kills it in terms of it's not a spell that you're actively going to be looking to pick. And that will change how battle magic is prioritized for sure. Speaking of magic, I've also heard that there's going to be some level of balancing between level 2s and level 4s. I have no idea what that would look like. Maybe they change it so level 2s and level 1s can dispel at 24 inches, or maybe they limit the amount of additional modifiers that you can put onto cast. Obviously, if you look at stuff like Mortuary Cult, right now you can be casting with a level 1 wizard at +5. That is fairly ludicrous. If you're playing vampire counts, obviously they don't want to touch Legacy, but they need to change things across the board, otherwise the Legacy factions are just going to dominate. But the Mortis engines, the fact that you can have 2 Mortis engines, which I'm pretty sure they haven't fixed stacking, still both just give you +1 to the cast there, just because they don't FAQ Legacy at all. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there, and it'll be interesting to see how they tweak that. Moving on, infantry, there's been some discussion about how things get changed. Lots of people have been talking about what they'd like to see, whether that is bringing back an extra rank bonus, so you can go up to 3 ranks for infantry, 4 ranks for horde, +1 combat res for outnumbering the enemy, limiting the amount of overkill that you can do in challenges. There's lots of stuff there that they could do to make infantry more appealing, without just making it do more damage. But on top of that, the rumours that have been swirling around is that maybe we'll see some sort of parry save. So if you've got a hand weapon and shield, you get either a 6-up ward or +1 to your save. That's something that's been floating around. And maybe we even see something to disincentivize line hammer. People have been talking about maybe they'll cap the width of units. I don't think I'd like to see that. I'd like to see things incentivized to be ranked up more than disincentivized to be wide. And that way you could still go, oh, in this situation, I've got my Graveguard, I want to go 8 wide still. I still want to be able to get a few more attacks with my unit. Speaking of getting more attacks, people have been rumouring that there's going to be something like Step Up coming back, where you still get to make all your attacks, or maybe you just get a fight in 2 ranks. I think infantry being able to get more attacks would be good. The main problem with something like that is it buffs the infantry that's already good, and undead are already one of the best armies in the game. Any direct buffs to infantry is a direct buff to undead, so I'm curious to see how they're going to handle that one, because I'd like to see infantry getting a step up, not necessarily step up, but infantry getting a leg up without it making undead even more of an issue to play against, because while you can beat them, they are one of the better armies in the game, and you can beat them. I think especially outside of the top tables, they are a little frustrating to play because they ignore a lot of the rules of the game. So if you've got a Tomb King or Vampire Counts player in your local meta that is just winning everything, they can be quite frustrating to play against, just because it doesn't feel like anything you do matters with their ability to never break from combat. Unless you kill units all in one go, they can top them back up. So there's a lot of stuff there that I'd rather not see those armies get too much more power. Now, onto a slightly interesting one. One of the rumours that I've heard flying around is that Falconhorn's going to become a once per game thing, and I could believe that. I absolutely could believe that. But then they did just print a new banner for Beastman, which does exactly the same thing as the Falconhorn. Now, I know from previous discussion with people who work for or have worked for Games Workshop that the lead time on print media is roughly 6 months, and the reason for that is they don't do their print media in-house currently. I know they're building another factory. I think that's still just for meeting, trying to get as much physical models out of the business as possible. But I think they're still doing all of their written rules, getting them printed out in China and then getting them shipped over here. So with that in mind, I think it's unlikely that the rules that were printed and will be released in 2 weeks' time, I don't think that stops the Falconhorn from getting nerfed. And I think we could be in a situation where we see the Falconhorn get nerfed and we also see that banner get nerfed as well. It would be a bit of a feels bad for Beastman players who have only just got the rules. However, I think it's a rule that is negative for the game, and I think there should be limitations on it. I think being able to turn off flying, it's an incredibly powerful rule. Being able to turn it off for one turn is fine. Or in the case of Bretonnians, being able to turn it off every turn, but it also turns off your own flying, wouldn't be too bad. I think it would still probably be too strong because Pegasus Knights still move 8 inches and still skirmish. But yeah, I think we'll likely see the Falconhorn and the Banner of the Moon both get hit with a nerf down to once per game. I also don't think we'll see points changes on them. I think they'll stay at 40 points each, and you'll just have to decide whether that's worth it to deal with, whatever you've got to deal with there. Speaking of flying things, dragons, obviously we've heard rumours for a long time that dragons are going to be addressed. I don't know how they do that. Maybe limiting their saves in some way. I think, so you could limit them to only a single save. You can only take the best save on the dragon. I think I'd like to see them capped at like a 4-up armor save. Because then, you've got a lot of wounds, you've got a high toughness, a 4-up armor save, and a 5-up ward or a 4-up ward, and then a 5-up regen. Whatever combination, it's still pretty tanky, but if you're not layering that third save on top, I think that addresses a lot of the issues. Yeah, I think that would help. It would leave you more vulnerable to poison and shooting bricks, but I hope that the way that the game ends up looking, those poison shooting bricks don't end up being something that's worth playing anyway. Just because, to move on, I think Travel Mystical Pathways, I would like to see that change to be wholly within. You've still got flexibility with how the unit moves around then, but it doesn't let you just move a massive pie plate unit entirely across the board, because you can go from one corner to one corner and end up moving something like 24 inches or more because your unit's so big. But if you're not seeing large targets, if half the armies in the game were previously bringing a large target and suddenly we see less large targets and more infantry, at that point the big poison shooting bricks are a lot less valuable. Start seeing those less, and maybe that's the change that we need to see there. Finally, Skirmish. Now, I haven't actually heard any concrete rumours about Skirmish, but I would like to see that one changed, because as it stands, Skirmish shooting is probably fine, but it's just kind of clunky and weird, and the way that Skirmish interacts when you get charged is frustrating. I'd like them to just completely rewrite the Skirmish rules. I think that would be the smoothest way of doing things, but also that's not really Games Workshop style, so I think we'll probably see a Band-Aid patch on it to see us out the rest of the edition that hopefully does well enough to make them not frustrating to play with and against. But, specifically the really good Skirmish melee units, I think something needs to be done about that. Just being able to park, one of the best characters in the game with a 360-degree line of sight, charge arc, and a very long charge range next to and outside of the charge arc of the unit that you want to kill on your next turn, I think that's a problem. And I'm not just saying that as someone who likes playing dragons and doesn't like playing against Bretonnians, but I think if they had some level of limitations so that you could then in return play back around them, that would be good. But yeah, I don't know how you do that is the problem. Maybe we just end up taking Skirmish away from the units that are too good in melee, but that feels like a little bit too punitive of a change. I'm not sure what you could do to make Skirmish work more, unless you just kept it so that Skirmish models have more flexibility in how they move, but they still have a vision arc. I don't know that works, because then if you just have 4 or 5 Pegasus Knights, you can just point them all in different directions, and then one of them will be able to see, and that would do the job for you. But yeah, I'd like to see a change to the Skirmish. That I think would be really helpful for the game. As someone who has used and abused Skirmish over the last year or so, I'd definitely like to see that one changed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those. name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff. But it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Ground Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.